Have you ever stood in the middle of an abandoned building and felt a sudden heavy, chill, crawl down your spine? These locations, ranging from the Victorian Gothic husks of psychiatric asylums to the silent, rusting skeletons of the industrial age, serve as primary sites for exploring the tension between our material reality and our psychological projections. The study of these abandoned spaces, what researchers call residual landscapes, requires a multidisciplinary approach that integrates environmental psychology, cultural hauntology, and even physiological forensics. The central inquiry remains whether an abandoned structure truly retains cause of past human suffering, or if the human mind, conditioned by cultural narratives and physiological stressors, projects meaning onto the void of silence. Research suggests that as spaces transition from being maintained and used to being dilapidated and abandoned, the structural forces that once governed behavior are weakened. This heightens the potential for creative action and the projection of identity onto the environment. Environmental psychology provides the foundational framework for understanding this interplay between a physical setting and the human psyche. The field posits that the environment directly influences behavior in a predictable manner, but this influence is most observable in real, life settings rather than controlled experiments. In the context of abandoned places, this relationship is defined by value orientation, where the significance of a site is addressed through transactions between place and identity. Roger Barker introduced the concept of behavior settings, illustrating that individuals unconsciously manifest different coping strategies purely based on their environment. In an active school or church, the architecture establishes a feeling of reverence. However, when those same structures become abandoned, the behavior setting is disrupted. This leads to a feeling of unease as the brain attempts to reconcile familiar architecture with an unnatural silence. Research into the social perception of these sites reveals a counter-intuitive trend. Abandoned places often foster higher levels of place identity and place dependence than urbanistically regenerated areas. In fact, there is a 98% probability that abandoned places yield higher levels of sense of place than regenerated ones, suggesting the imprint of human history is more palpable in decay than in the sanitized uniformity of modern development. The feeling that an abandoned asylum or factory holds echoes of the past is also a cultural condition known as hauntology. Derived from the work of Jacques Derrida and expanded by Mark Fisher, hauntology refers to the persistent return of the past in the present, specifically the haunting of the present by lost futures, trajectories of social and cultural progress that were promised in the 20th century but failed to materialize. In this framework, the eerie is the defining aesthetic of the abandoned space. It is a failure of presence that occurs when a site, like a hospital designed to be teeming with staff and patients, is unnaturally empty. This absence forces the observer to ask why the space is empty and what agencies were responsible for the departure. This cultural condition is reflected in internet aesthetics like liminal spaces, which depict transitional places such as corridors or stairwells unsettlingly devoid of people. Research suggests these spaces fall into an uncanny valley of architecture, where physical places that appear familiar but subtly deviate from reality create a sense of eeriness. While some might explain these feelings through the stone tape theory, a pseudoscientific claim that traumatic events are imprinted on certain stones or materials and replayed like a magnetic tape, the scientific community finds no mechanism for such a recording. Geologists like Sharon Hill argue that emotion is a biological process and does not exist as an external recordable energy like electricity. Furthermore, random rocks do not possess the read-write heads or specialized recording mechanisms found in magnetic technology. Despite this, the theory remains popular because it validates the heaviness or off feelings individuals experience when visiting sites of mass trauma. The unseen energy perceived in these spaces may actually have tangible, physiological origins. Decaying structures are hostile environments that subject the human body to stresses that can manifest as psychological disturbances. For instance, water-damaged buildings are breeding grounds for toxic molds such as Stachybotrys chartrum. Chronic exposure to mycotoxins has been linked to severe neurological deficits. Research on children exposed to these molds found objective abnormalities in 90% of subjects, including frontotemporal theta wave activity indicative of metabolic encephalopathies and behavioral changes like irritability and depression. Beyond the physical dangers, the psychological allure of abandoned places is tied to their status as liminal spaces, places of transition occupying the threshold between two fixed states. The term liminal comes from the Latin limen, meaning threshold. These areas, like corridors and waiting rooms, are designed for movement rather than habitation. When living things are absent from a space designed for them, it creates a temporal liminality. Features such as mono yellow wallpaper or endless, windowless corridors, as seen in the back rooms, aesthetic heighten the awareness of being alone and stuck in time. Sigmund Freud's concept of the unhamlet, or the uncanny, explains this as something familiar that has been repressed and now returns. Abandoned domestic spaces are particularly uncanny because they reveal secrets of the home that ought to have remained hidden. This fascination has led to the rise of urban exploration, or urbex, where individuals visit its temporary, obsolete, abandoned, and derelict spaces to document the passage of time outside of state-recognized heritage. Rose Macaulay's study, The Pleasure of Ruins, argues that ruin-mindedness is a cognitive quality common to all humanity. We find beauty in ruins because they represent the transience of human achievement and the inevitability of decay. Motivations for urbex include nostalgia, a longing for a past that cannot be experienced firsthand, and the adrenaline of defying authority. For many, it is an act of empowerment, a way to reclaim forbidden spaces neglected by society. Case studies of famous abandoned sites highlight these themes. Danvers State Hospital, established in 1874, was a flagship for the Kirkbride Plan, a model of mental health care emphasizing that a beautiful setting could restore patients to a balance of the senses. Its staggered wing design was intended to maximize natural light and fresh air. Meanwhile, Waverly Hills Sanatorium was opened in 1910 to combat the tuberculosis epidemic, or the White Plague. It utilized treatments like heliotherapy on solarium porches before being repurposed as a geriatric center that used electroshock and experimental trials. These sites now stand as monuments to both architectural ambition and human suffering. In conclusion, the question of whether an abandoned asylum holds cause of past suffering cannot be answered by a single discipline. The unseen energy is a complex synthesis of several factors: cultural hauntology, where the present is haunted by lost futures; physiological stress from environmental toxins like mold and infrasound; psychological projection triggered by the failure of presence in liminal spaces; and environmental resonance, where the breakdown of social order creates a heightened sense of place that modern regenerated environments often fail to provide. Whether it is the biological reaction to toxins or the cultural weight of unfulfilled promises, abandoned spaces remain powerful reminders of what